The morning he showed me the contract, I knew I was in trouble, but I had no idea how deep it went. It was early. The air in his suite was too still. Kalen Thorne, the alpha, slammed a rolled-up parchment on the table between us. His knuckles were white. He leaned over me, blocking the light from the window. The whole room smelled like old paper and ink. He said, "You sign this." His voice was low. It wasn't a question. I looked from his gray eyes down to the document. My own name was scrawled at the bottom. I didn't recognize it. "I don't remember this," I said. I shook my head and took a step back. My hand went to my temple. The room felt tiny with him in it. The ornate bedpost dug into my shoulder. "I would never agree to this," I told him. My voice sounded thin. I was scared. My heart was pounding. He moved around the table. His steps were silent on the thick rug. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, but it wasn't cruel. Then his whole body went stiff. His eyes flashed a wolf gold color. He took a deep breath and a low growl started in his throat. He was looking at me, but he didn't seem to see me. He was caught by something else. The jagged scar on his collarbone stood out against his skin. For just a second, I felt a flicker of warmth where his hand held mine. It was gone as fast as it came. I yanked my arm free. The movement caused a sharp, sudden pain in my chest. I stumbled back and clutched my sternum. The ache was deep. It felt wrong, like I'd torn something inside me. I looked right at him. My breath was short. "Why does it hurt to pull away from you?" I asked. He stared at me. His face was a mix of fury and pure confusion. The contract just sat there on the table between us. A silent judge. Then a loud knock shook the suite door. A voice called from the other side, urgent and strained. "Alpha, Roderick Vance is at the eastern gate. He challenges for the pack." Pit. My throat still ached from the words I'd left hanging in that room. The cold morning air at the fortress gates bit my face. It smelled like wet stone and something electric. Then the heavy wooden door of the guardhouse just splintered inward. Roderick Vance kicked the remaining planks aside. He had silver in his dark hair. He stepped through with 5 other wolves at his back. His cold blue eyes found me first. Then Kalen. He pointed a finger right at my chest. His voice was flat and sure. "She's not yours," he said. Kalen moved before I could even breathe. A sickening crunch of bones filled the air. Black fur erupted over his skin. His clothes tore into rags. One second he was a man. The next he was a massive wolf. He put himself right between Roderick and me. Roderick changed just as fast. A tawny wolf faced the black one across the stones. They didn't growl. They just stared. Then they flew at each other. They collided with a sound like cracking timber. Claws ripped through fur and found flesh. The snarls turned the dawn air into something savage. I could only watch. My friend Chloe was somewhere in this nightmare because of me. Blood sprayed across the gray flagstones. It painted both their muzzles. Roderick lunged for Kalen's throat. Kalen twisted and slammed a heavy paw into his side. I heard a rib break. The fight didn't last long after that. Kalen stood over Roderick's beaten wolf form. He was human again. A deep cut ran across his ribs, bleeding freely. He was breathing hard. He looked at me then, not at his rival. His eyes were full of that fierce, terrible light from the fight, but I saw his hand. It was trembling at his side. I felt a stupid, unwanted pull toward him, a warmth in my own chest that felt like a betrayal. I took a step back. My movement was small. It was cold. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. Roderick shifted back to human shape on the ground, coughing. Kalen's people moved in to drag him away. Kalen kept looking at me. He took a step forward. His blood dripped on the stone between us. Why was his hand trembling after he'd won? I wasn't going to like the answer. The metallic taste of blood still coated the back of my throat. It was thick. I couldn't get rid of it. Later, I found myself on a cold stone balcony. The morning air carried the sharp scent of pine from the forest below. I didn't hear him approach. Kalen Thorne, the alpha, just appeared beside the railing. His large frame was a silent presence. He didn't look at me at first. He stared out at the forest, one hand resting on the rough stone. His knuckles were raw and split from the fight. He said, "The bond hurts you when you fight it." His voice was flat. It wasn't a question. He turned his head just slightly toward me. I saw the line of his jaw, tight and clean. A small muscle jumped there. He was waiting for me to deny it. I didn't. I just watched a bird dive between the trees far below. My own chest felt tight. A dull pressure had settled there since I walked away from him. He said, "I don't like forcing you." The words were quiet, almost lost in the breeze. He said them to the view, not to me. It was an admission he hadn't planned to make. His shoulders dropped a little. The proud line of them softened for just a second. Then he was rigid again, like he'd caught himself. That small crack in his control was more confusing than any command. The air between us on that balcony was heavy. He leaned on the railing, close enough that I could feel his heat. I didn't move. The memory of that tearing pain in my chest kept me still. He didn't touch me either. He was just there, a solid wall of tense silence. I could see the marriage contract from the corner of my eye, left forgotten on a small table inside. That document was the only reason I was still here. He finally pushed off the railing. He turned to face me. His storm gray eyes held mine, and there was a question in them he wouldn't ask. I had no answer to give. He took a slow breath like he was going to speak, then let it out. He just gave me a short, sharp nod and walked back inside without another word. I stayed there. The empty space beside me still felt charged with his nearness. Whatever came next, I hadn't figured out why he'd left that contract untouched. Real quick, if you're here for the secrets and the lies, hit subscribe. Because what we found in the archives changes everything. The ghost of his grip still ached around my forearm. I stopped at the first torch in the corridor outside my room. The flickering light threw crazy shadows on the wall. My mind kept replaying his quiet confession. I don't like forcing you. I couldn't stay. The thought of Chloe, alone and scared with that phone, pushed me into a run. My boots slapped the cold stone floor. I shoved past a guard at a junction. His surprised grunt echoed behind me. The main doors were just ahead. Freedom. Kalen Thorne stepped from an archway and blocked my path. He was just there. His eyes held a dangerous gold light. He moved faster than I could see. His hand shot out and clamped my wrist. His grip was absolute. "Let me go," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "You know I can't." His words were rough. His chest rose and fell too fast. He was hurt from the fight, but he didn't let it show. I pulled harder. He snarled. It wasn't a human sound. His body began to shake. I heard the wet, sickening crunch of bone. His fingers lengthened into claws around my wrist. Dark fur sprouted from his skin. His face stretched into a muzzle filled with sharp teeth. He grew. His clothes tore. In seconds, a massive wolf stood where the man had been. It was all muscle and rage and wild, golden eyes. The beast loomed over me. Its hot breath washed over my face. A low, continuous growl vibrated in the air. I stumbled back until my shoulders hit the cold wall. I was too scared to scream. I couldn't look away from its eyes. There was a terrible intelligence there, but it was Kalen. It was the thing inside him, the thing that claimed me. It nudged me with its broad head, a motion that wasn't gentle. It forced me to turn. It herded me step by step back down the corridor I'd fled. I went because the alternative was those teeth. We reached my chamber door. The wolf waited until I pushed it open. Then it turned and padded away, its claws clicking on the stone. I stood there, shaking. I heard another series of cracks and shifts from around the corner. A minute later, Kalen walked back into view. He was barefoot, his clothes in tatters. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands, now human again, were clenched into fists at his sides. They were shaking. That question, why his human hands were still shaking after the wolf was gone, sat there like something unfinished. My own hands wouldn't stop trembling. I found myself blinking in the archive's gloom, the dry dust catching in my throat. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and decay. A shape shifted at the far end of the aisle. Chloe spun around. She clutched a stack of old scrolls to her chest. Her colorful headband was the only bright thing in the room. "I just want to know the truth," I whispered. My voice was rough from the dust. Chloe studied my face. Her eyes went from my torn clothes to the bandage on my arm. She looked at me for a long moment. Then her shoulders relaxed a little. She slowly lowered the scrolls onto a small iron table. The table held only one other item. I recognized the formal script on its open page. It was the marriage contract. Kalen had left it there, unattended. He hadn't even closed it. We read the old scrolls together by the light of a single, flickering bulb. The brittle pages described bonds arranged for territory, not fate. They told of alphas who severed true bonds to make better political matches. I traced the faded words with a trembling finger. Chloe watched me, her frown deepening with every line. She kept glancing toward the door. Then I held up one brittle page. The family name listed there was my own. It was a lineage record, tied to a bond that was officially voided generations ago. Chloe's hostile mask fell completely. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the page to my face and back again. I understood her silent question. What else had been hidden from me? I carefully rolled the damning scroll. I tucked it inside my jacket. It felt heavy against my ribs. "Knowledge is dangerous here," Chloe said. Her voice was low and urgent. She backed toward a shadowed archway I hadn't noticed before. "You can't trust anyone." Then she was gone. I was alone with the evidence and the silent, waiting contract on the table. Everything else made sense. Why Chloe had backed toward that archway didn't. The grit from those old scrolls was still in the back of my throat. I walked into Kalen's private study. The first thing I smelled was the rich leather from his armchair by the fire. He stood at the window, his broad shoulders outlined against the dark glass. I walked to his heavy desk. I placed the stolen scroll right on top. I didn't shout. I just wrapped my arms around my waist and waited. His world had rules I didn't understand. Rules I knew I couldn't survive. He turned from the window. His storm gray eyes found the scroll. Then they found my face. I saw the command to leave form on his lips, and then I saw it dissolve. He looked from the damning paper back to my eyes. He saw the raw fear there from earlier. His own eyes widened just a little. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look less than completely certain. "The burden of this bond," he said. His voice was low. He stopped himself, like the words had escaped without permission. He turned his back to me. He ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it messy. "They smell a weakness. Roderick was just the first. Our marriage," it was a necessary declaration. A lock on a door everyone was trying to break down. He didn't face me when he said it. We stood there in the quiet room. The only sound was the fire crackling. He was close enough that I felt the warmth from his body. He took half a step toward me, then he stopped. My breath caught. The space between us felt heavy, full. I looked at his hands resting at his sides. They were perfectly still now, but I remembered how they'd shaken earlier after the wolf was gone. The violence he had to commit to keep his place, to keep me. It left a tremor in the man. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he might say something true. He didn't. I moved toward the door. And the question of why he'd had to kill a wolf to keep me, it moved with me. The echo of his confession was still humming in my jaw. The late afternoon sun in my room felt thin. It didn't touch the chill deep in my bones. I forced my hands to relax. Chloe's coded message was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, smoothed the crumpled paper on my desk. The symbols were our old college shorthand, a mix of Greek letters and musical notes we'd invented during boring lectures. My thumb traced the edge. It felt thin, fragile. Piece of my old life that had no place in this stone room. I found a blank sheet and started translating. Each symbol I decoded pulled me further from the palace. I could smell the cheap coffee from our campus library. I could hear Chloe's laugh. The words took shape. They talked about safe routines, my empty apartment, questions from my old boss. Then the tone changed. The script grew tighter. Chloe wrote that unfamiliar men were asking about me in our neighborhood. They weren't police. They weren't friendly. She said they had a particular way of moving. It reminded her of the men from the fight at the gates. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I kept translating. The last part was the clearest. Chloe, my human friend with her colorful headbands, was scared. She said Roderick's allies were searching the human side of the city, looking for any trace of me. She begged for a sign I was still alive. She needed proof to make them stop looking for her. The paper slipped from my hand. I had dragged her into this. My chest felt too tight. I thought of Kalen's political necessity, the marriage contract on that iron table. It was a cage, but my running had built a different trap for Chloe. That was why I'd backed toward that shadowed archway during the fight. I was looking for a way out for both of us, and I'd found only more danger. I grabbed my pen. My hand shook at first. I pressed the heel of my palm hard against the wood to steady it. I started writing a reply in our code. I told Chloe I was alive. I warned her to hide the ledger. I told her not to come here. Each word felt like a betrayal of the silence Kalen demanded. The bond between us gave a faint, warning ache. A thread pulled taut across the palace. I ignored it. I thought of his face earlier. The raw confusion in his eyes when he spoke of the bond. That wasn't an alpha's command. It was something almost human. It didn't matter. Chloe mattered. I finished the message, folded it small enough to hide. I pushed it aside. Why my hand had stopped shaking after I wrote her name? That would come back to me. The frantic scratch of the pen was still buzzing in my cramped hand. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the king's study. The thick scent of pipe tobacco hit me first. It lingered in the still air like a warning. I needed his formal wax and seal to send my coded reply to Chloe. The room was dark, just a single green-shaded lamp on the massive desk. I moved toward it, silent on the deep rug. My note was folded tight in my palm. A secret I couldn't keep for long. I opened the top drawer, looking for the small brass stamp. Kalen Thorne stepped from the shadowed archway leading to his private rooms. I hadn't heard him approach. He wore only dark pants. The line of his bare shoulders was rigid. A fresh, angry cut marked the skin over his ribs. He looked from my face to my closed hand. His voice was low, careful. "What do you have there, Sloane?" I took a step back from the desk. My next breath came out ragged. I forced my fingers to relax, but the paper felt like it was burning my skin. He hadn't chosen me. The bond had. There was a difference. That thought let me lift my chin. "Nothing that concerns the pack," I said. He crossed the room in 3 strides. The air felt thick. "Everything you do concerns the pack now." He held out his hand. It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. I saw it in his eyes, not just anger, but something that looked like pain. The bond gave a stupid, dull ache in my chest. I still didn't give him the paper. "It's for Chloe," I said. "She needs to know I'm safe." His hand didn't move. "You will not send it." He took the last step and his fingers closed around my wrist. His grip was firm. He pried the note from my hand. He unfolded it and read my coded writing, his eyes scanning fast. Then he went completely still. "Roderick knows her name," he said. His voice went flat. "His people have been seen near her apartment. Any contact you make leads them right to her." He looked at me and his expression was hard. "This is why I set the rule. This is why I had to kill a wolf to keep you." He crushed the paper in his fist. Everything else I could handle. But why I'd felt that ache when he looked hurt, that was different. The ghost of his grip was still on my shoulders. I found myself at the garden archway. The smell of jasmine hit me hard. I walked under it. The moon made everything look silver and black. I heard his footsteps on the gravel before I saw him. Kalen stepped from the shadow of a willow tree. He wore a dark shirt, no jacket. He looked tired. I stopped and waited for him to tell me to go inside. He didn't speak at first. He came closer until we were an arm's length apart. The bond was a quiet pull in my chest. It felt warm, sad. "I didn't come here as your king," he said. His voice was low. I saw his eyes were fixed on my hands. They were still. They'd stopped shaking after I wrote Chloe's name. I hadn't even noticed until right then. He saw it too. His own hands hung at his sides, empty. "I know you think this is about control," he said. He looked away toward the dark palace. "It's about a world that eats the weak. I have to stand in front of that every day." He took a slow breath. "I am afraid it will eat you, Sloane. My world, my fights, my crown." He said it like it was just a fact. I was stunned. I'd expected anger or orders. Not this. My guard felt too high. I didn't know what to do with his honesty. I made myself look at him. "You can't protect me from everything," I said. My voice came out softer than I meant. He turned his head back to me. The moonlight caught the line of his scar under his shirt. I saw the weight he carried. It wasn't just a crown. It was a burden. I felt myself soften just a little. I didn't step closer. He didn't either. We stood there in the quiet, sharing the same air. The space between us felt different. It felt like a choice we weren't making. Then his head snapped to the left. His whole body went still. He was listening. "What is it?" I asked. He moved past me toward a thick hedge of roses. He knelt and brushed away some leaves. There, carved into the flat stone of a garden bench, was a symbol. It glowed with a faint, dying blue light, a communication rune, and it was still warm to the touch. We looked at each other. The almost moment was gone. Now there was only a new, cold understanding. Someone inside these walls had just sent a message. The chill from the garden was still on me. In Chloe's apartment, the first thing I smelled was stale incense and cold takeout. Chloe, with her headband, was already at the small safe behind a poster. Her hands moved fast, nervous. "It has to be here," she said, her voice tight. The fridge hummed. I scanned the room. Every shadow in the messy space seemed dangerous. I went to the window to look down at the dark street. My throat was dry. I thought of Kalen's warning. This was why I had to come. Chloe couldn't face this alone. I heard the soft click of the safe opening behind me. I turned to see her pull out a thin, leather-bound ledger. Her face was pale but set. She held it out. "The proof is in the shipments," she said. "Names, dates, everything." I took the book. It felt heavy. The bond in my chest gave a faint, warm thrum. The apartment door opened without a sound. Roderick Vance stood there. The rival alpha with silver in his hair moved quiet like a predator. He looked from Chloe to me, and a slow smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "A human, an omega, and a secret book," he said. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "What a charming scene." Chloe froze. I stepped in front of her, the ledger hidden behind my back. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. "You've been busy, little bird," Roderick said, his eyes fixed on me. He took a single step inside. The air grew colder. Snooping in places you don't belong, making my old friend Kalen look weak. His smile turned sharp. He locks you in a gilded cage and calls it protection. I'd call it a waste. His words were a different kind of trap. I felt the truth of them ache behind my ribs. Kalen's control was a cage. But this man, he wasn't offering freedom. He was offering a different kind of ownership. I saw a flicker in his eyes then. Not anger, it was a bitter satisfaction. He enjoyed the fear. He liked knowing he could shatter our fragile peace. Then Chloe said something under her breath. I almost missed it. "The storm's coming," she whispered. "He doesn't like to get his feet wet." Roderick's smile vanished. His cold blue eyes snapped to her. For a second he looked thrown. That's when the first thunderclap hit. It was so loud the window panes rattled in their frames. A second later the skies just opened. Rain hammered down on the roof like it wanted to break through. Roderick looked from Chloe to the window. His pleasant mask was completely gone now. He looked furious and almost nervous. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was low and flat. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him, just like that. We stood there, listening to the rain. My hands were shaking. I looked at Chloe. "What did you mean?" I asked. "About his feet." She let out a shaky breath. "Old pack gossip. Vance hates heavy rain, says it messes with his senses. He always retreats to higher ground." She hugged herself. I needed him to leave. The dread he'd planted in my gut was still there, a frozen stone I couldn't dislodge, but now it had a crack in it. The storm didn't let up, it got worse. Later, deep in the palace's safe room, the only sound was the rain slamming against the sealed steel door. It sounded like a monster trying to get in. Kalen stood across from me. He was checking the door's heavy bolts again. His shoulder was tight against the wall. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then they died completely. A thick, silent dark swallowed us whole. I was scared. My breath came too fast in the blackness. I heard Kalen move. A match scraped and a small flame bloomed in his hand. It lit the sharp lines of his face from below. His eyes found mine in the sudden light. He looked afraid too, but not of the dark. He touched the match to a stub of candle on a shelf. The weak light made our shadows huge on the concrete walls. "The generators should have kicked in," he said. His voice was low. It was the first time I'd ever heard real worry in it. A sound like a mountain breaking echoed above us. The whole room shuddered. Dust and bits of concrete rained down from the ceiling. I flinched and covered my head. Kalen was across the room in an instant. He didn't touch me. He put his body between me and the door. We waited. Another terrible groan came from the corridor outside. Then a deep, final crunch of collapsing stone. Silence, just the rain again and a new, absolute quiet from the other side of the door. "The outer passage is gone," Kalen said. He didn't move from his place in front of me. He lifted the candle and went to the door. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. I watched the light play over the back of his neck. A small, old burn mark was visible just above his collar. He listened for a long time. When he turned back, his expression was grim. "We are sealed in, for now." The space felt 10 times smaller. He was my jailer, and my only shield. I needed that shield to survive, even as I hated the cage. I saw his hand, the one not holding the candle, flex open and closed. He was fighting his own tension. A strange ache pulled at my chest. The bond, stupid and persistent. I looked away from him at the useless door. The grit of panic still coated the back of my tongue. In the new silence of the sealed room, I felt the cold of the floor through my dress. I sat with my back against the wall. The storm was finally dying away. Kalen stood across the small space. He was checking the solid stone door again, his shoulders blocking the faint light from a single high window. Dust motes drifted in that weak beam. He finally stopped. He leaned back against the door. He looked at me for a second too long. I didn't know what it meant. Then he slid down to sit on the floor, mirroring me. He rested his arms on his knees, and for the first time since I'd met him, his hands were completely still. He wasn't commanding or moving, he was just waiting. The way he'd looked at me just then, it wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. "I wasn't always the only option," he said. His voice was low, stripped of its usual force. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I had a beta, a friend. I trusted him with the southern border." He rubbed a spot on his side, just above his hip. I saw the edge of a thick, ropey scar peeking from under his shirt. "He was the one who told Roderick where to find you that first day. He said our bond was a liability. He said he was doing it for the pack." I watched him trace the scar with his thumb. His admission hung between us, a different kind of weight. Chloe had said something once when she thought I wasn't listening. She said he carried every betrayal like a stone. I understood it now. I didn't feel angry looking at him. I felt tired and sad for both of us. We stayed like that for a while, sitting on opposite sides of the same small room. The space felt smaller. I could see the slow rise and fall of his chest. I could feel the warmth of him from where I sat. I didn't move. He didn't either. The unspoken thing was the contract, the signed paper that bound us in this quiet tomb. It felt less like a law now, more like a shared sentence. The air grew thick with everything we weren't saying. I almost asked him if the scar still hurt. I didn't. My palms still felt warm. It was stupid, but I could still feel the exact shape of Kalen's scar under my fingertips. It wouldn't go away. The warehouse safe house was freezing. The air smelled like concrete dust and old oil. Roderick ushered me inside and I saw the limp. It was new. A deep wound pulled at his side with every step. His cold blue eyes didn't leave me. My own eyes went to the small iron table. Our marriage contract was just sitting there. My stomach twisted. "You got what you came for," Roderick said. His voice was a low rasp. "The ledger is safe. I assume you checked." I nodded. My hand was tight on my bag strap. I needed to leave. Every part of me was screaming to run. I took a step toward the heavy door. The floor was gritty under my shoes. That's when I saw his hand, the one he kept flexing. It was empty, but his fingers curled inward, like he was holding something sharp. He didn't move to stop me. He just smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I reached for the door handle. The metal was cold even through my glove. I pulled. The door was locked. A solid deadbolt click echoed through the whole space. I turned back to him. My heart was drumming against my ribs. My breath came out in a short, white cloud. "Open it," I said. "I think not," Roderick said. He leaned back against a steel beam. A door at the far end of the warehouse opened. 3 of his rogues walked in. They spread out, blocking the exits. I backed up until my shoulders hit the cold metal door. One of them, a woman with a shaved head, held a length of rough rope. The reality crashed into me. This wasn't an investigation anymore. I was the evidence. The ghost of Chloe's scream was still a cold taste in the back of my throat. Like metal. Next thing I knew, I was standing in Kalen's war room. My palm was flat against the cool glass of a live map. It hummed under my hand. Kalen stood across the wide table. He was studying a screen. A muscle in his cheek jumped. He looked up. His gray eyes were flat. "You saw the message," he said. "It wasn't a question." "We have to go get her," I said. My voice was too loud. "No," he said. He turned back to the screen. "He wants exactly that. He wants you to run to me and beg. He wants me to walk my people into his territory for a human." "She is not just a human," the words tore out of me. "She is my friend. I brought her into this. And I am trying to keep you both alive." He finally faced me. His hands were braced on the table. "I am locking down the entire compound. No one leaves. You will have a guard at your door at all times." He looked tired. More than anything else, he just looked tired. But his words were just another wall. "So that's your plan? You hide me away and let her die." "My plan is to not play his game." His voice was low. "He cannot touch you here." I stared at the map under my hand. The glowing lines looked like a cage. My chest felt too tight. I thought of the scar on his side. The one he'd shown me in the dark. I had never asked if it still hurt. Now I understood why. Asking would mean I cared. About the wound and the man who carried it. That felt like surrender. "You are not protecting me," I said. The anger was cold and clear now. "You are storing me, like that contract on the table, a thing you own." He went very still. "That is not what this is." "It is exactly what this is." I took my hand off the glass. The spot where my skin had been was warm. "You forbid me to write to her. You forbid me to leave. Now you forbid me to help her. What is the difference between a mate and a prisoner, Kalen? Tell me." His expression closed off. "The difference is that a prisoner's keeper does not lie awake fearing for her." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the most honest thing he could have said. It made everything worse. I walked to the heavy door. I pulled it open. I did not look back at him. "Then enjoy your sleep." My knuckles still ached from how tightly I'd clenched them. I sank into my own bed, the sheets cool and familiar. I stared at the dark ceiling. The fight was over, but the problem remained. Chloe was in danger because of me. Kalen would not act fast enough. His rules were a cage, and the mate bond was the lock. I could feel it then, a low warmth in my chest. A constant pull toward the west wing where he was. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. A path laid at my feet, one I was supposed to follow. I hated it. I sat up. I needed that pull to stop, just for a little while. I needed to think without him in my head. I focused on the warmth. I pushed against it with my mind. A sharp, sick pain flared behind my eyes immediately. I gasped and let go. The pain faded, leaving the warmth unchanged. I tried a different way. I didn't push. Instead, I thought of my old apartment, the sound of Chloe laughing on my couch, my human life, choices that were only mine. I wrapped those memories around the bond's warmth like a blanket. The pull dulled. It became a distant thing, like music through a wall. It was quiet. For the first time, it was just quiet. And in that quiet, a new thought got very, very loud. If I could muffle the bond, what else could I do? I stood up and walked to the window. The gardens outside were just shapes in the dark. I kept thinking about my old front door key, the feel of it cold and jagged in my hand. I remembered the smell of new paint in my apartment. I held on to that. And the bond? It got quiet. It was still there, but it was like a radio turned down low. I could tell where it was pointing, but it didn't pull at me anymore. That's when I understood. Earlier, with the door, my fear had been so loud it drowned everything out. Now I'd done it on purpose. A cold sort of calm washed over me. My door opened without a sound. Kalen stood there. He filled the whole doorway. He wasn't in his usual stiff jacket, just a dark shirt, and his hair was a mess, like he'd been pulling at it. He looked at me for a second too long. I didn't know what it meant. "I felt a shift," he said. His voice was quiet, no edge to it. "Are you all right?" He didn't come in. He stayed right on the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. I saw his fingers press into the wood, then let go. He was waiting. "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded small. The bond hummed softly between us. My secret. He took one step inside. The room suddenly felt tiny. He was close enough that I could see how tired he looked. Close enough that the air around him felt warmer. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at me, and I saw the same confusion I felt. This wasn't about pack politics or challenges. It was about this almost moment hanging in the air. Neither of us moved. I pushed it aside. I think about why he stopped at the threshold later. Right then, all I felt was a dull ache behind my eyes. The bond, muted but still there. The warehouse was huge and dark. It smelled like wet concrete and dirty river water. I saw Chloe then, tied to a rusted pillar. A wolf, its fur the color of old concrete, stood guard over her. It growled, low and mean. I froze. My breath stuck in my throat. And the bond, the quiet bond I'd made, it snapped back to life inside me. Sharp and electric, a live wire. My hands shook as I reached for the ropes on Chloe's wrists. "Sloan," she whispered. Her voice was cracked. Her bright headband was all crooked. "Don't talk," I said. My fingers fumbled with the hard knots. The guard wolf took a step toward us. It showed its teeth. The bond throbbed, a warning I couldn't turn off. I saw the moment it decided to attack. I shoved Chloe out of the way. And a sound came out of me, a snarl, raw and strange. It shocked the wolf. It hesitated for just 1 second. I didn't think. I threw myself into its shoulder, knocking it sideways. The ropes fell away from Chloe. But then I heard it. Heavy footsteps pounding toward the warehouse door from outside. "Can you run?" I asked, pulling her up. She nodded, rubbing her wrists. We ran for a broken window high up on the wall. I climbed onto a wobbly stack of old pallets first, then reached back for her. My hand left a smudge on the dirty glass. Her hand closed around mine. The relief of touching her, of knowing she was okay, it broke my focus. The muted bond didn't just come back, it exploded open. It was like I'd turned on a giant spotlight, screaming, "Here we are." A chill of pure dread shot down my spine. But why that wolf hesitated at my snarl? I had no answer for that. Back in the cold warehouse, the only sound was water dripping somewhere. I pulled Chloe toward the door we'd come in. A slow clap echoed through the empty space. Roderick Vance stepped out from behind a pile of crates. 6 of his men moved from the shadows, forming a tight circle around us. I pushed Chloe behind me. I felt her fingers grab onto the back of my shirt. "The bond led you right to me," Roderick said. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. His voice was slick and sure. I looked for a way out, but my heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. The air smelled like rust and wet mold. I knew then, he'd let us think we were escaping. He'd counted on the bond. He used it like a leash to bring me here, and to bring Kalen right to him. One of the guards shifted. A big guy with a shaved head. His claws scraped the concrete floor. It sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Chloe whimpered behind me. And at the same moment I felt a pull in my chest. A real, physical tug. Like a hook was set under my ribs and someone was yanking on the line. Kalen was coming. He was close. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. It just meant he was walking straight into the trap. A huge crash exploded above us. Part of the rotten ceiling caved in. Plaster and wood rained down. I ducked over Chloe, covering her head. Dust filled the air. Through the new hole in the roof, I saw the night sky. A massive, dark shape landed with a heavy thud in the middle of the debris. It was Kalen, in his wolf form. His fur was dirty and matted. He planted himself between us and Roderick's men. A low, dangerous growl came from his throat. He didn't look at me. His whole focus was on Roderick, but I saw it. I saw the way his ears were pinned flat back against his head. I'd never seen him look like that. It was pure rage. The rest made sense. Why he was here, why Roderick set the trap. But why his ears were pinned back like that, why the rage looked so personal. I didn't have an answer for that either. The metallic taste of my own fury was still thick on my tongue. I watched from the corner of the warehouse as a single shaft of light cut through the dusty air. Then the door across the space crashed open. Kalen filled the broken frame. He saw me there on the floor, my cheek sore from Roderick's backhand. His eyes went from my face to the ropes on my wrists. His whole body went very still for a long second. I had to keep reminding myself he wasn't human. Then he moved, crossing the distance in quick strides that stirred the dust on the floor. I scrambled back before I could stop myself. My shoulders hit the cold wall. He stopped a few feet away. His hands were clenched at his sides. "Your rules left me alone," I said. The words came out flat and bitter. "You forbade me from writing to Chloe, so I had to come myself. You built the cage, Kalen." He just locked the door. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, and his shoulders sank down like a weight had been placed on them. The usual command in his eyes was gone. In its place was something raw that made my own anger feel brittle. A shout echoed from a hallway beyond the main room. Roderick's voice calling orders. We were out of time. Kalen reached a hand toward me. It wasn't a demand. It was an offer. I looked at his open palm, then curled my fingers tight against my legs. The bond between us was a low, constant ache in my chest, a warmth I both hated and craved. He let his hand fall. He turned his head toward the sound of the approaching threat, and I saw the muscle in his jaw work. He'd hesitated at my snarl in the forest because he was waiting for me to choose him. He was still waiting. He moved past me then, not to grab me, but to place himself squarely between me and the broken doorway. He was putting his body in the way. It was the most honest thing he had ever done. I pushed myself to my feet, the ropes digging into my skin. We stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. The space between us was heavy with everything we had not said. We just listened to the footsteps getting closer. The sharp ache in my jaw was a stubborn reminder of our last argument. I followed the guard into the council chamber. The scent of aged cedar and cold stone pressed in on all sides. Kalen stood before the elder's high table. He looked like a statue carved from the same gray rock as the walls. His hands were clenched behind his back. The old wolves watched him with cold eyes. I could feel their judgment like a weight in the air. It was thick with the smell of old paper. I stopped just inside the doorway. My own breathing sounded too loud. Elder Marcus, a man with a face like carved leather, spoke first. His voice was dry. He said the pack needed a strong alliance now more than ever. He said a human mate was a liability, not a strength. Kalen did not move, but I saw the skin around his eyes tight. A faint, dangerous light glinted deep within them. I felt a sudden, unwelcome heat in my own chest. It was a reaction to their dismissal of me. Kalen's head twitched to the side. His whole body went rigid for a single second. It was as if he heard a sound no one else could hear. His nostrils flared. He was receiving a mind link. The elders kept talking, demanding his compliance. They did not see the shift in him, but I did. The line of his shoulders changed. It was not a relaxation, but a gathering, like a spring coiling tight. Elder Marcus demanded his final answer. The room waited. Kalen turned his head slowly. He looked straight at the old alpha. His voice was low and clear. It cut through the silence. "I claim Sloan," he said. "Now." He did not look at me, but the words were for everyone. He was choosing. The formal claim was supposed to be a ceremony. He was doing it here like this as a defiance. He turned from the high table and walked toward me. The elders began to shout. Kalen passed me without a word. He just looked at me once. His eyes held a terrible, focused calm. Then he strode out of the chamber. I had no choice but to follow. The iron clamp of Kalen's grip still ached deep in the bones of my arm. My boots hit the damp concrete floor of the cell, and the sour reek of mildew coated the back of my throat. Chloe huddled against the far wall, her curls matted with dirt. A guard's heavy footsteps stopped right outside our door. I pressed myself flat against the cold wall, my shoulder blades digging into the rough concrete. I held my breath. The footsteps moved on down the hall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to move now. I crept to the office door Chloe had described. My hands shook as I tried the brass knob. It was locked tight. I glanced desperately down the empty hallway. I remembered the thin metal hairpin tucked into my boot. I pulled it out and jammed it into the lock. My fingers were clumsy. A sharp click sounded. The door swung inward silently. Inside, a small wall safe sat behind a torn painting. I dropped to my knees in front of it. The dial was cold under my fingertips. The dial was cold under my fingers. I had to spin it to the numbers Chloe had whispered. One wrong move would trigger an alarm. My mind went blank. All I could hear was my own breathing. Then I remembered. I pressed my ear against the cold metal and turned the dial. I listened for the clicks. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. The lock released with a heavy thunk. I pulled the safe door open. Inside was a single, thick ledger. I grabbed it. The pages smelled like dust and old ink. I shoved the book into my jacket and turned to run. A sudden, sharp heat bloomed behind my sternum. It wasn't a compulsion. It was a raw, open wound of feeling that wasn't mine. It was a stark, lonely fear. It was Kaelin's. The bond showed me his state for one clear second. He was afraid, not for his title. For me, he hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. I finally understood why he'd hesitated when I'd snarled in the forest. He had been afraid of his own need. Now I was afraid of mine. I needed to reach him. Not because of any bond, but because he was alone, just like I was. One thing kept pulling at me. How did Kaelin know I was in danger? The phantom pressure of his mind against mine still vibrated behind my eyes. It was a raw, intimate static. The cold rain needled my face as I squinted toward the compound's lights. I was hiding behind a broken wall, my hair wet against my neck. The ledger was a heavy block in my pocket. Then his voice came again, not through my ears but inside my skull, stripped of all command. Sloan. It was just my name, but it sounded like a man out of breath. A tired whisper in my mind. I wrapped my arms around myself. His fear was a cold stone in my own stomach. It wasn't pushed at me. It was just there, a shared weight. I felt his focus on the road, the strain in his hands from gripping the wheel. The bond showed me the shape of his exhaustion. I passed you in the hall that day, his mind voice said. The words were slow, like he was picking them up one by one. I saw you reading that old treaty. You look so. He stopped, the link hummed with his hesitation. I'm so tired of being king. The confession sat between us and the silent link, a truth he hadn't meant to give. I understood then. He hadn't ignored me. He had walked past because looking at me, seeing my curiosity, had been a reminder of a life without that crown's weight. I almost sent something back. Not words, just a sense of being seen. My own walls were thin out here in the dark. I pulled the feeling back at the last second, biting my lip until I tasted salt and rain. The connection went quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of what I hadn't said and what he had. The bond felt like a tether now, not a chain. I focused on the feel of the ledger's worn leather under my fingers. I pushed that sensation down the link to him, along with a single, clear thought. The false wall behind the main generator. It was a pact. It was trust. Why I'd pulled the feeling back at the last second. That wasn't going away. The phantom pressure of Kaelin's confession still squeezed my ribs as I walked into the compound's central holding area. The air was chilled and sterile, sharp with the smell of ozone and cleaner. My shoes scuffed against the gritty floor as I moved between towering metal shelves. I found Chloe crouched behind a stack of plastic crates. Her face was pale. She gripped her phone like a weapon. I pulled her into a tight hug. My own ribs ached from the relief. She was shivering hard against me. You have the ledger? I whispered into her hair. She nodded against my shoulder and fumbled at her jacket. A heavy, leather-bound book was tucked in her waistband. Before she could hand it to me, a slow clap echoed through the room. Roderick Vance stepped from the shadows between the shelves. 6 of his guards moved to surround us. The lights buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Roderick held up an identical ledger. A cruel smirk twisted his mouth. Looking for this? He asked. His voice was smooth and mocking. This one's just for show. A pretty prop. The real one with all the names and roots is safe elsewhere. He dropped the fake book to the floor with a thud. He described his operation then, his cold blue eyes fixed on me. He talked about shipping werewolves like cargo, about black market buyers and silenced packs. He called our bond a shackle. He said Kaelin and I were pathetic, playing at mates while he built an empire. Kalen, who had entered silently behind Roderick, let out a low growl. He stepped in front of me, his broad shoulders blocking my view. The jagged scar on his collarbone was stark against his skin. I saw the way his hand, usually so steady, trembled once before curling into a fist. He hadn't chosen me. The bond had. There was a difference. But the ache I felt for him in that moment was entirely my own. Roderick just laughed. He snatched the real ledger from Chloe's slack grip. Then he turned and threw it through the grimy window of a manager's office built into the far wall. The glass shattered. The old wooden floor of the office let out a deep, groaning crack. Kalen shoved me back toward Chloe. "Get to the door," he ordered, his voice rough. But the guards closed ranks, blocking our only exit. The office floor sagged, splintering with a sound like tearing cloth. Roderick smiled, confident and satisfied, as the structure holding his secrets began to collapse in front of us. That question, the tremor in Kalen's hand before the floor gave way, sat there like something unfinished. The raw heat of his power still crackled like static on my skin. I stood ankle-deep in shattered marble, the air sharp with the smell of crushed stone. Then the floor was gone. We fell into darkness and noise. Something heavy slammed the air from my lungs. Dust filled my mouth. When the roaring stopped, there was only the sound of our breathing in the dark. I was on my back. Kalen was a solid weight behind me. We were pressed together in a small pocket of broken stone. I sat up slowly, my shoulder blades against his. He didn't move away. His breathing was wrong. It was a harsh, uneven sound in that tight space. I felt a deep ache in my own chest that wasn't mine. It was a hollow pull through the bond. I turned my head in the gloom. I could see the outline of his profile. His eyes were shut tight. I reached back with a careful hand. My fingers brushed over the back of his hand where it rested on the rubble between us. His skin was very cold. He flinched at my touch. His voice was a low scrape of sound. "The walls are too close," he said. The great alpha werewolf, Kalen Thorne, sounded young. He sounded ashamed. He didn't pull his hand away from mine. I let my fingers rest there, a point of contact. The bond hummed with a simple warmth. Another small shift of stone made us both freeze. The movement brought our faces inches apart in the dark. I could see the faint sheen of sweat on his temple. I leaned forward without thinking. I stopped before our foreheads could touch. His breath warmed my lips. I thought he leaned forward too, just a fraction. I pulled back. I made myself look at the jagged rock above us instead of at him. I stayed because his hand was still under mine, and he was still cold. I had promised to survive with him. This was part of that. Whatever came next, whether he had leaned in first, was the part I hadn't figured out. The warmth of his shoulder under my palm still pulsed against my own cold skin. My focus returned to the jagged rubble beneath my boots as a muffled explosion shook dust from the ceiling above. The digging sounds became frantic scrapes right over our heads. Kalen shoved me hard behind a fallen concrete beam. He moved with a new kind of slowness that scared me. A jagged crack of light appeared above the ledger. The book lay just out of reach in the next pocket of space. Chloe's faint voice came from somewhere beyond that wall. I dropped to my knees and stretched my arm through the narrow gap. My fingertips brushed the worn leather cover. The way he'd looked at me just then wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. A section of the debris wall gave way with a grinding roar. Roderick Vance, his expensive suit torn and face smeared with dirt, broke through. Kalen met his charge with a raw sound of effort. They crashed together in a cloud of powdered concrete. Kalen was already injured and he stumbled back under the force. I saw the ledger again, now fully exposed. I lunged for it just as Roderick kicked out. His boot caught the edge of the book and sent it skittering. It landed near a smaller opening where Chloe's hand appeared, waving desperately. I threw the ledger toward her fingers. She grabbed it and pulled it through. Kalen was pinned against a leaning slab, Roderick's forearm at his throat. I felt a sharp spike of pain through our bond that wasn't my own. His eyes found mine across the wreckage. They held no command, only a quiet and terrible acceptance. That look cracked something open in my chest. I looked past him at the unstable wall supporting most of the rubble pile. A single, heavy piece of concrete balanced on the edge. My hands found its rough, cold surface. Bringing it down might bury Roderick. It might also bury Kalen and seal us all in here forever. Something locked in my chest and refused to move. I pushed. Whether my push would bury Kalen with him, I wasn't going to like the answer. The rough leather of the ledger's cover still pressed a phantom rectangle against my ribs. I stood in the newly opened corridor, blinking against the grit in the beam of my flashlight. Kalen Thorne was slumped against the wall beside me. A deep cut on his temple bled freely, mixing with the gray powder on his skin. He pushed himself upright with a low groan. A heavy wooden beam had fallen across his legs. I dropped to my knees and started clawing at the broken concrete pinning him. The sharp edges bit into my fingers. Boots pounded somewhere down the hall behind us. Chloe's voice came from the other side of the debris pile. "I have it," she called. She meant the ledger. I saw her hand wave through a narrow gap. Kalen's eyes glowed a faint gold in the dark. He braced his hands on the beam and pushed. The muscles in his neck stood out like cords. A pained sound escaped his clenched teeth. The beam shifted an inch, then settled back. The footsteps were getting louder. "Chloe, run!" I yelled through the gap. I shoved her small backpack toward her reaching hand. She grabbed the strap. Kalen took a sharp breath and heaved again. This time his whole body shook with the effort. The debris around us groaned and a larger gap opened. Chloe's fingers closed around the ledger inside the pack and pulled it free. The gap immediately collapsed as Kalen's strength gave out. He fell back against the wall, his chest moving fast. The enforcers were right outside the broken door now. I grabbed Kalen's hand. His palm was rough and warm. I did not let go. I braced my feet against the rubble. We would hold them here. Chloe had to get away. Kalen looked at our joined hands for a second, then he looked at me. His eyes held no command, only a weary question. I gave a single nod. It was not a choice. It was the only move left on the board. The door splintered open. The rest of it made sense. What Sloan had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening didn't. We found Roderick Vance in the wreckage of his office, backed into a corner. His scent was wrong, wild like a rotting bond. Crackling, chaotic energy flickered around his hands. It smelled like ozone and burnt fur. Kalen moved in front of me without a word. Roderick snarled a broken sound. He flung out a hand and the heavy oak desk slid toward us, scraping across the broken floor. Kalen dodged left. I went right. Roderick's power lashed out again, a wild arc. It missed us and hit a cracked pillar. The whole room shook. Plaster rained down. I jumped back as a chunk crashed where ID stood. Kalen tackled him. They crashed into the broken wall. I saw the muscles in Kalen's back strain as he pinned the other man. Whatever I felt, it might just be the bond talking. But seeing him fight for something other than control of me, it made my chest hurt. Roderick threw Kalen off with a burst of that unnatural strength. He stood, panting, his hair coated in dust. "You took everything," he screamed. His voice cracked. His cold blue eyes weren't full of rage. They held a deep, hollow pain. Kalen stood up slowly. He was breathing hard. He didn't attack again. He just looked at his former rival, his eyes weary. Roderick raised a clawed hand, ready to strike. Then his whole body shuddered. The chaotic energy around him flickered once like a dying light. It went out with a soft pop. The wild scent vanished, leaving only the smell of defeat. Roderick Vance dropped to his knees on the rubble. He was empty. Just a man with no pack left. I stepped forward, the real ledger heavy in my hand. The elders appeared in the shattered doorway. I held the book out to them, its pages open to the proof. I put it away and got on with things. But why I'd flinched when I heard that soft pop? It refused to stay put. My knuckles ached. I found myself leaning against a cool crate in a storage room. The main chamber was loud with shouts, but this small room was still. Kalen stood a few feet away. He pressed a torn piece of his shirt against a cut on his shoulder. His hair was matted with dust. We were alone for the first time since the world ended. My breath came out in one long, slow stream. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I watched him. He finished with his shoulder and let his arms drop. He stared at his own hands, turning them over. His shoulders were slumped. The line of his jaw was soft. He looked like any other tired man standing in the wreckage of his choices. I pushed myself away from the crate. I took one step toward him, then another. He didn't look up. "I'm not an alpha anymore," Kalen said. His voice was quiet and flat. He said it to the air between us, not to me. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was the sound of something precious breaking. Then he lifted his head. His storm gray eyes found mine. There was no wall there, no calculation, just a weary kind of honesty that made my chest feel tight. I was close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. I could smell the iron scent of his blood over the dust. The space between us hummed with a quiet warmth. My hand lifted on its own, fingers curling slightly toward his face. I stopped myself before I made contact. I remembered why I'd flinched at that soft pop in the council hall. It was the sound of the sealing wax on the marriage contract breaking. That sound meant a door had closed. Now we were on the other side of it, standing in this new, empty room. We just looked at each other. The noise outside the door was a world away. And that one thing kept pulling at me. What Sloan had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening. "Real quick, If you're here for the moment when a broken bond becomes something real, hit subscribe. The next part is where we find out if it can hold. So, here's my question for you. When the fight is over and the titles are gone, what's left? Is it the person, or is it the promise you made when you had no other choice? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to hear what Sloane really said, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you there.